Greetings, my name is Marcus Cox and I've been blogging on this website for quite some time. The URL is goingbeyondthebox.com and it's about going beyond the program that we've been all programmed since birth. And today's talk is kind of auspicious because this is coming up on my birthday, February 7. I'm an Aquarian and we're a little out there, have been out there for a long time. But this lady here is actually, I don't know if you can see that or not, Anita Moriani. And she is going to be presenting all week at the Multiversity, which we went to a year ago. And I had my birthday there a year ago with Dr. Joe Dispenza. So Anita's going to be presenting there. And one of the really neat things about Anita, and I feature her on my website, goingbeyondthebox.com, I've got a video she did on her testimony of crossing over to the other side. Her story is wonderful, and I highly recommend you watch her little video there that I put. It's she actually flatlined. She had cancer, and she flatlined, and there's lots of witnesses, obviously, because she's in the hospital. And she, all life signs were gone. She died, technically dead. And she could hear everything that was going on around her. She heard her doctor, her brother, her family, and they're all really sad. And she actually, I can't remember how long it was, but she was technically dead for quite some time. And she crossed over to the other side, and she met some spirit beings, angels, whatever you want to call them. And the reason I'm mentioning that and why I'm featuring that on this side, I've got a few people that crossed over to the other side. I'm coming out of the closet today and talking about my crossing over to the other side. If you're on goingbeyondthebox.com, I've got an interview I did there on from darkness to bliss through meditation, and that's a blog talk radio interview I did, and I describe my crossing over to the other side, and it's very similar to Anita's. So I highly recommend you watch that. What I'm going to talk about today, and this I'll put this on my blog, is my experience of crossing over to the other side. I was in a horrendous car accident, 15 years old, and I was out at the lake cottage with my parents and having a wonderful time. We took 2 months off every year out at Mamio Beach, Pigeon Lake, just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, and I was out with some friends, and he had borrowed his mom's car, and we were going through the back roads there. They're gravel roads. Back then they were. And he's doing 95 miles an hour, showing off, and the car is swerving. And we come over a rise, and there's a hay truck going by. That was, I can't remember the name of the highway. I think it might be Highway 2 in Alberta. And he panics and slams on the brakes, which you can't do that on a gravel road at 95 miles an hour. And there were 4 of us in the car. I reached for the ceiling, which is humorous looking back. And we went off into the ditch, hit a boulder, and flipped. And they told me later, I went into a coma. They told me later that I went about 100 feet in the air and took the windshield off of my head. And I don't remember hardly any of it. But when I crossed over, I was in a coma for 10 days. I had some amazing, just a unity consciousness, if you will. I learned later in Sanskrit, Satchidananda. Some people call it Samadhi. There's a lot of testimonies out there. I've got one right here with me today, describing or comparing the crossing over experience with going to heaven. There's another gentleman on my website, he's a doctor, and he describes it as going to heaven, and he met a bunch of Christian angels and things. But my point today is that this is really happening, and it's not a joke, it's not a drill, it's not science fiction. It really is real. It's totally documented now. Back when mine was in 1968, and when I came back and opened my eyes, and I'd been on the other side for 10 days, I guess. And I was in pain, just horrendous pain. I had broken up everything you can imagine, and I was on traction and basically dead. It was in ICU. And when they asked me if I wanted a pain needle, I said, give me a kill needle, because I didn't want to come back. It was pretty bad. I've just discovered recently they've got brain scans of people that go into. I had a major concussion. I was reading a book by Dawson Church. He's got a section in his book, and it's backed up by scientific studies. They're showing the EEG on somebody that's had a traumatic brain injury, and it really wipes out a whole section of your brain. You're kind of in pain, and I got wired on drugs, which is part of my Blog Talk interview. I discovered what it was like to be addicted to opiates. I got strung out on Demerol. I was in so much pain, and they prescribed whatever I wanted. And I ended up just going into a very dark era. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this video today, is because I've been there. I've been on the other side, come back, and then I went into an abyss, like a hell world, if you will. And I actually had a demon chasing me at one point. And then I tried to make sense of what had happened to me. And I went to my pastor, and he just said, have faith in God and be good. And that, I was really hurting. I wanted to know what that was, what happened to me on the other side, and I couldn't make sense out of it. Before that, I had been a very happy-go-lucky kid. I talked to God out in the forest, and I was really happy. But after that car wreck, I was a mess. I became suicidal. I used to get my dad's gun out and hold it in my mouth and cock the trigger. And I was never done anything like that. It turns out I'm not alone. There's a lot of things that happen to you when you go through that kind of stress, and you're always thinking about the problems and the horror of those experiences, like PTSD. That's another reason I'm doing this video, is so I can talk to people out there. There's this book just came out. This is by Dawson Church, and he does a work called EFT, emotional. Anyway, I'll find out later. But it's really working wonders with people with PTSD, and it's basically what happened to me. I ended up getting, like I said, I got strung out on drugs, ran away from home right after my 16th birthday on heroin. I was just a wreck. Made it all the way to Vancouver. That happened to be the summer of love, and I met all these wonderful people. And within, I don't know, maybe a few months, I got off the opiate drugs, the barbiturates, and I was taking psychedelics, which at that time were illegal. And that's part of my story today. Is I was dazed and confused, had bad trips. Like, my wife doesn't even like to talk about LSD because she had a horrible experience. And I had lots of those. I took LSD psychedelics hundreds of times. But I ended up getting very adept at letting go. And another subject today is this book here. This is original from it's like the one I had back in 1969, actually 70 when I really got into this. And you'll see on the back here is the serpent embracing its tail. And on Dr. Joe's books, he's got, actually my wife's t-shirt from Dr. Joe has a serpent embracing its tail. What that stands for is you've gone through the whole life cycle and you've understood, you've become enlightened. So that became my mission, was to become enlightened. And this book here, it's got, he starts out, and Timothy Leary, most people don't really know how brilliant he was, but he was a visionary. And he talks about the psychedelic visionary experience releases a wide range of awareness of energy and tunes us into patterns of neurological signals. That's what I'm leading up to here. There's studies going on now, and this is from the Harvard University, the Castilia program, where Timothy Leary, Dr. Richard Alpert, who became Baba Ramdas, and Menzner were studying and given a grant to study the psychedelic experience. And they couldn't map it out, and they were psychologists. And they mapped it to the Eastern text. The first one was called the Psychedelic Experience, and that's based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the afterstates, the bardos. And I read that, and then I got my hands on this, and this is based on the Tao Te Ching. He does a masterful job of guiding you through the session, and that's the key to harnessing the absolute awe of psychedelics. And they're doing that now at Johns Hopkins University, and there's a couple more universities. And they've got groups going down to Peru for ayahuasca with a shaman. So it's really coming out into the open now. And now they just made pot legal. I'm sure there's people out there having some kind of psychedelic experience. So on that note, I'm going to say this is really a profound study, and I'll link to this when I put this video up. I've got a link to Dr. Joe's description of the psychedelic experience and how it matches some of the research he's done. This book here, Becoming Supernatural, we after the retreat we went on, we got the first edition of this. This is an amazing book. It's by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's demystifying the mystical, which is what I happened to me. And he maps it out and he explains it, puts it in. They use brain scans, over 10,000 brain scans of people meditating, and they're doing that with people in psychedelic sessions now too. They didn't have that kind of equipment back in the 60s when Larry was doing what his work was, and it's exciting. I mean, it really, when you start to really see it and it starts to make sense, it really clicks. And like in Larry's book here, one of the prayers, he says, see how each part joins the whole. I mean, you can literally watch. You got all this conglomerate of thoughts that you've been programmed since birth to believe that you're some guy in a body and all that. But see, I had a head start because I went to the other side and came back, so I was kind of ripe for a psychedelic experience. And I learned how to surrender. I could just lay down and dissolve. And that's basically what it is. He's got a prayer in here where he says, it's right at the beginning. Yeah, stillness. It's called Falling Free, the law of gravity. Falling free. The root of lightness. Repose, the root of movement. Stillness, the master of agitation. And the Bible says, be still and know that I am God. It's true. But the monkey mind's not going to let you be still. You got all these things going on. And it takes mindfulness and practice to learn how to meditate and become perfectly still. I'm actually doing this talk to you from my meditation room. I come in this room at usually 3 a.m. This morning the clock said 3:33, which is kind of auspicious. And I start meditating, and sometimes I go for hours, and I lose it. And Dr. Dispenza, the meditation I do is called the pineal gland meditation. When you get into this, and that's part of this going beyond the box, we've been programmed to believe that we're these little schmucks with all these problems we inherited, genetics and all that. That's not true. You are magnificent, and you can do almost anything you want, anything you visualize. Which brings me to this book here, which is I'm so excited about. I just finished this today. It's by Dawson Church, and he calls it Mind to Matter, and he's proved it, literally. He's got all these studies, and I want to show you this. This is how I haven't been able to put this book down. You see all those pages? I've got this book highlighted all over the place. I mean, it is so profound, so beautifully done. And all the clinical studies, it's got all these, he's talking about falling into the light. He's got studies backing that up. This is scientific studies, peer-reviewed studies. And if you read the on the back, he's got, if you've been wondering whether your thoughts really do affect your life, this marvelous book will make you a believer. Synthesizing hundreds of studies in the fields of biology, physics, and psychology, Dawson Church shows that moment by moment, the energy fields of our brains are literally creating reality. And I'm a witness. I am, the more I do these meditations, I've been doing them for a couple of years now. And I come in here usually around between 3 and 4, because that's the melatonin zone, if you will. And it's perfectly still. I mean, it's perfectly still. And I lose it. I get into, I call it multidimensional, I guess. It's almost like being on acid. And he describes that in detail. They go into chapter 12 on becoming supernatural. It's about the pineal gland. And I've got that all highlighted, but and Project Coherence, making the world a better place, the pineal gland. The crystals in our pineal gland act like a cosmic antenna and the doorway to these higher vibrational realms of light and information. This is how we have internal experiences that are more real than our external ones. What I didn't mention yet is after I tuned in to the light, the real heart, soul of who I really am, I lost interest in this world, in the material world. And I met a teacher, and it was magnificent. It's in my short biography there on the website. His name was Paul Twitchell, and he was the guru for Ekankar, the ancient science of soul travel. And I was reading his books and stuff and trying to do soul travel as he described it in the book, and couldn't do it, and frustrating, and trying to get out through the third eye and all these things. I didn't understand any of that stuff. But he actually came to Vancouver, and a bunch of little miracles happened. I was very poor at the time. I managed to make enough money. I got fired because I was such a space cadet. But my check was enough to pay for the consultation with him. And when I met him, he was wearing a blue suit, white shirt, and red tie. Not the way you think a guru would look back in those days. I mean, the Mahesh Yogi was the Beatles, and movie stars were going to Rishikesh and hanging out with the Maharishi, and this guy looked like a Wall Street banker. But he was really sweet and very, very poised, very just genuine, completely genuine. And he invited me into the room. This is at the Hotel Vancouver on Georgia and Granville, or Georgia. And I go and I sit with him, and I tell him, I've been trying to do soul travel as you described it in your books, and I can't do it. And he said very quietly and sweetly, try right now. And he told me what to do, and I sat in the chair across from him, and then about 3 minutes, all of a sudden I was in the corner of the room, a 360-degree vision, which he describes in his books. He calls that the soul body. It's your awareness. It's got many names. Kundan, I mean, there's just a zillion names for it in different religions. Anyway, I was in there, and I could see the whole room. I could see my body sitting in the chair, the physical body, and I could see him. And at the exact split second, I was in the corner of the room, out of my body. He goes, "There you are." And it freaked me out. I mean, and I had all these acid experiences behind me, and it still freaked me out. And I went, and I was right back in my body again. Dr. Joe describes an experience like that when you go. He calls it interdimensional. It's the pineal, which is the third eye, by the way. If you look up the pineal gland, the eye of Horus. He describes a situation where he left his body, went through the pineal into an inner realm, and he did that a couple times, and then he realized he'd left his body, and he'd freak out and go back, and he did that a lot, and it takes months sometimes to get back to that poised state, and then you learn to surrender. You don't withdraw. You just go with the unknown. And it is unknown, really. So I learned how to do that. And I learned how to astral travel, which now is called Lucid Dreaming. And I went into a monastery. I met a guru and he invited me to go to India. And that was one of my dreams back then. And I didn't have any money. I was a broke yoga teacher living in a van in the Okanagan Valley, teaching in Kelowna, Penticton, and the Soyuz. If anybody watches this, remembers me as the yoga teacher back for BC night schools. Anyway, I got invited to a Christmas party in San Francisco by the guru that I was studying his master course. And I went down there, and he said, you know, I want you to meet me at the Desert Monastery. So I went to the Desert Monastery, which is Virginia City back then, quite a ways from San Francisco. My van was on its last legs. It's a great story. And I stayed there, and I practiced with the monks and meditated with them. And they're out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and they're printing books. And I really got into it. I mean, it was so still and quiet. And then the guru's leaving. He's going back to Hawaii, and he says, I want you to meet me in Edmonton, which is where I'm from, right? He's going up there. So I said, okay, and I didn't have any money. I got my mom to wire me, I don't know, $50, whatever it was. And it was like 30 below out there, going up through Idaho and all that. It was really... Anyway, long story short, I ended up getting into Calgary at, 2 or 3 in the morning with no money, out of gas, just like I'm below empty. And I look over, I got my window open, and I'm waiting, I'm just sitting there, not doubting that, you know, God will provide. And I hear this guy go, shit, you know, and I will go in and I ask, what's wrong? He says, my pressure gauge just broke. And I said, oh, I've got one. I said, I'll trade you for a tank of gas. He says, perfect, thank you. So I traded him this compression gauge because I was going to rebuild the van, right? I bought that a month ago, just happened to have it there, and he broke his as I drove up, right? Anyway, long story short, I got out of there, I got a full tank of gas, I made it to Edmonton, drove into the driveway, and it was like 30 below. It was freezing. The guru comes up, I see him in Edmonton. He says, I want you to come to India. And I said, I want to, I'd love to. And he says, you know, talk to one of the priests about it. It was $4,500 to go. It was Indian Odyssey. There was like 50 people going, and all this religious pilgrimage to all these temples and the Dalai Lama. And I mean, it was an incredible trip. But I had no money, and I said, okay, yeah, I'm going. And I didn't doubt or second think it. The next day, I got a letter, a check in the mail for $4,350. And it was from that car accident I was in, the one where I died and went to the side. That's 3 years ago. Just happened to show up. Just happened to, right? Sure. I got the check for $4,350. I had a guy that wanted to buy my van, but it wouldn't start because it was 30 below. It went from 30 below to 32 above. He calls me, he says, do you think it'll start? I said, yeah. We go out, fires right up. He gives me cash. I hug him goodbye. Away he goes. I go down and I get the reservation to go to Hawaii and then to India, and I pay the $4,500 for the Indian Odyssey. And then I ended up going to India and taking vows as a sannyasin, and that's another story I'll go into later. I'll be writing a book soon called Full Circle, which is what this is. Started out a normal person, crossed over to the other side, got into those crazy drugs, and fell in love with the moment and God being everywhere. Absolute breathtaking moment, the Tao, and then becoming a monk, going to India, and renouncing the world. And I was a monk for 4 years. And I had so many things happen, especially while I was in India, that I'll talk about at a different time. Thanks for listening. I hope this helps you go beyond the box, which is what this website's about. That box of programming, all those learned conditioned kids. Listen to the way Larry describes it. It's beautifully done. He's got 5 states of mind explained. He says, there's the symbolic mind, that fraction of the nervous system which perceives, discriminates, interprets, remembers, learned, conditioned cues selectively imposed upon the kaleidoscope of sensation. This is the imprinted mind. And that's the last section of this book. The imprinted mind is what Dr. Lipton and Joe all call the program. It's the program. I love this little joke that Dr. Lipton makes. He says, the Matrix is not science fiction. It's a documentary. So all that programming you've had since birth, you need to break through that. And that's another book I got here called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I'll be doing more of these videos. I want to thank you for watching today. And bye for now.